I'm Dave Greene, and I'm really happy to be the first person to be videoed for the Teachers Talk Back project. I first thought of teaching because of teachers that I had. The first was my second grade teacher, who was in PS 66 on Jennings Street and Longfellow Avenue in the South Bronx. And we were a very mixed group of an integrated class, and in second grade she had us working on things that the kids in sixth grade were working on. She inspired us to do things. She was creative. We wrote letters to the president, and we were actually quoted in the Times, April 19th, I believe, 1956, about what to do in Little Rock. We were aware of what was going on. Teaching's an art, it's not a science. You have to live it, you have to breathe it, you have to understand it. You have to be walking down the street one day and just kind of looking at something and say, oh my God, that gives me an idea for something I could do Tuesday when I'm supposed to be covering this. Or you're reading something or watching a television show and you record it, and the next thing you know, you're using it. It's that kind of thing. You're constantly thinking about ways that you want to motivate and inspire kids. The benefit of public school is that you're with people who are not necessarily like you. It shaped me a great deal. It formed who I became as an understanding person of what it's like to be in other people's shoes. It's 40 years since I started teaching in September of 1970 at Adlai Stevenson High School. And I'm still in contact with the first members of the first graduating class in 1974, as well as kids who were there when I left Stevenson in '86. I'm still in contact with kids who I worked with at Woodlands High School from 1986 to 1990, and I'm still in contact with kids who I worked with at Scarsdale High School from '90 until I retired from there in 2008. There are all these contacts that wouldn't have happened unless there was some kind of connection made between them and I, and them and many other teachers who I worked with over the years. Another example, over the summer, my buddy who I first coached with at Stevenson High School as a football coach said that two former players wanted to get together for dinner one night over the summer. So we said sure, we made arrangements to meet, and it turned out it wasn't two of them. It turned out it was 25 of them. Kids who had played for us from 1974 through '82. Some of them now are in their mid-50s. And it was quite a day. There was actually a picture taken of about a half a dozen of us who have this kind of hair or less. So that's the kind of bonding that happens. And you don't know that because no one's telling you that. The media doesn't want to portray the kinds of good things that go on every day, and that's a shame. One of the saddest things, and I'm sorry to say I was part of it, and I had an agonizing choice that I had to make, was leaving New York City to go teach elsewhere. And for several reasons that happens. Number one, as teaching became more centralized and more top-down, those who are the best teachers, who do a lot of creation of lesson plans and activities and simulations and the kinds of things that get kids engaged, were becoming automatons who were forced to do things that were more robotic and boring, and things that you didn't need to have a master's degree to do or a love of teaching to do. So one of the things that happened is that a lot of the best teachers left because they couldn't teach. They were being told to teach poorly, and they knew it. That was one of the reasons that I left, for example. Another thing that happened is that when I started, as a result of the UFT, New York City teachers were, in many cases, better paid than in some of the suburban areas. What happened from the mid-1970s on is that the pay scales shifted and they reversed. So financially, teachers being faced with these imposed conditions and relatively less financial reward said, why am I still here? And it's agonizing because you don't want to leave. But you have family, you have responsibilities, you have all those things that middle-class people have and aspire to, and you want to have some more autonomy in your work. So you leave. Now what you find is people are trying to rate teachers based upon test scores. You can't do that. For example, I met this morning with two Teach for Americans who I work with now in my capacity as a field supervisor at Fordham University Graduate School of Education. They're second years, and I asked them how their kids last year did. And one of them, who I think is a brilliant teacher and can become a brilliant teacher, was lamenting that his kids didn't do as well on the standardized test at the end of the year, but they were doing well in his class. And so we ended up talking about the assessment tools. And what we realized is that the standardized tests didn't assess anything worthwhile. And so what looks to the public like a failed project is not, because I can verify that his kids are doing better according to other statistical analysis, but simply by seeing how well they're behaved now this year, how attentive they are, how curious they are, how engaged in conversation they are, how their writing is improved because he's working with the same kids this year as last year. But if you looked at the state assessments, he's a failure. No, he's not. The problem with the reform strategies is that they are coming out of Washington, Tweed Ring building, and the non-educating policy makers led by those who can give them the money. So when the Bill Gates Foundation and the Thomas Fordham Foundation say, here's several $100 million, I want you to spend it this way, they jump. And so that's part of the problem. And the other part of the problem is nobody ever asks the grunts, the people who are fighting in the front lines, who have been successfully working with kids for years, what to do. That's the ultimate problem. You've got non-educators trying to tell educators how to educate. And as long as that is the policy, there is no reform. I'm working exclusively with Teach for Americans, and one of the questions that always comes up about Teach for America is its success rate in retaining these kids who have volunteered to work for 2 years. If you want to keep them, and they're all bright kids, you know, it's very tough to get a TFA position, especially in these economic circumstances. You have to treat them as professionals, and you have to pay them. If you pay them, give them benefits, which you need a union to do, and you give them the opportunity to be trained by successful master teachers, and you give them the opportunity to act creatively, then you're going to get good teachers, and they're going to want to stay because they're inspired to stay and they're getting paid to stay. It's a worthwhile job, because you cannot separate a person's personal financial need from their professional responsibilities. Education is not something that anybody can do. I think that's one of the fallacies that you know. There are two sayings. You know, if you what is it? One of them. If you can't do this, and then if you can't do that, teach. I forget what it is. I probably have a mental block on it. The other thing is that, oh, anybody can teach. It's simple, and we know it's not. And so if we start by eliminating that idea that anybody could teach, and start replacing it with the idea that let's get good, talented, bright kids and train them how to do it. The other thing is that we have to stop trying to learn to teach based upon the processing of data and tests. If we understand that tests are there only for one purpose, which is to assess what kids know and can do and help them get better at it, as opposed to, look at me, my school system is better than yours, or this school needs to be closed, that's something that's going to have to happen. But that's not going to happen if all we want to do is prepare kids for tests and teach towards the tests. We need to understand that the rowdiest kid in the room can be the brightest kid in the room who only needs to be engaged. And when you start with engagement and bringing back the curiosity that they had when they were 3 years old, anything can be done, regardless of their skill set. And that's how you get it to be done.